Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party. I'm your co-host Dallas King, and with me as always is the Scottie Pippen to my Jordan, the Kobe Bryant to my Shaquille O'Neal. It's Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Yeah, looking forward to swapping kind of the East side for the West series. What was the kind of? No, I'm swapping the East Conference for the West Conference on this episode. So looking forward to diving into it.
Get you with your basketball knowledge there, eh? So, yeah, on today's show, we are going to be reviewing Stephen Curry Underrated to find out if it is a slam dunk or an air ball. But before we get into the main part of the show, we just want to take a few moments to pay tribute and send our condolences to the family of A24 alumni Angus Cloud, who sadly passed away on the 31st of July, aged just 25. It had been reported that he'd been struggling with mental health issues following the recent death of his father, and it was a reminder to anyone that everyone has their own personal struggles, and if you do need to talk, that there are people out there who will listen. Now, Angus is probably going to be best remembered for his breakout role in Euphoria as Fez O'Neill, the drug dealer and friend of Zendaya's Rue. It was a role that could have easily been completely cliche, especially if you've seen other Sam Levinson films and TV series, and leaned into the stereotypes of a typical drug dealer. But he played it with humanity and even actually some level of scruples, as opposed to the scene I'm thinking of towards the end of season one, where he actually cut Rue off, even though he could have made money selling her drugs. He saw that she was struggling and decided to cut her off. And of course, he then got a sort of extended sort of plot line in series two, where he was romancing one of Rue's friends as well. I guess was Euphoria the thing that you sort of knew him best for?
Absolutely, yeah. It's kind of wasn't really familiar with any of his work sort of outside Euphoria at this stage, but it kind of looked like with these classic cases where someone passes away and they often say, and we kind of think of their contribution to art and film ends in that moment, but obviously it feels like there's still stuff to be released on the horizon. Obviously I know the third season of Euphoria has not been shot at all yet, but yeah, I must admit I was quite surprised by that news. A friend of mine, I think I had quite an early night last night, and I stirred at the middle of the night, tossed and turned a bit, looked at my phone, and one of my friends had messaged me of obviously that his untimely passing, and just one of those ones. It just really shocks you. I mean, he was just such a great talent. I mean, the first season, he was one of these sorts of standout supporting characters, but yeah, kind of watching him in that sort of second season and seeing that sort of relationship that he had with Maud Apatow's Lexi just really stood out for me. He was just someone that had a real tenderness that it almost felt like he was blending what seemed to kind of very relaxed, jovial individual on sort of social media with sort of a real tenderness, and you were kind of watching Fez and so on, and obviously I doubt I doubt the drugs and dealing necessarily matches in real life, but you kind of got the impression that this really gentle, kind man, someone that really chose their words well, perhaps not the one person that might be the most articulate person in the world to start a conversation, but be someone that would really care for individuals and use those words just sparingly but the best. That's what he was probably going to be like, and you can never assume these things, but kind of that was that impression I got of this kind of young man, and just absolutely gutted. I mean, I think back to a really great bit of A24 work that was completely separate to Euphoria, and that was when he was on the A24 podcast with Simon Rex. Both of them kind of coming up through sort of like different acting sort of trajectories, but very kind of birds of a feather to an extent, just shooting the breeze about their history and how they got involved in acting. Sort of the casting involvement in sort of like Euphoria and how he was found in that story. Just really great to hear his story, and someone that didn't seem to do a lot of media or articles or interviews, but was such a great insight. And just hearing someone like Simon Rex, who seemed to really take him under his wing in that kind of episode, just gave me such an insight into the person, and just really heartbroken for his family and loved ones. It just sounds like it's been a horrible few weeks for the Cloud family, and just nothing but love to all of them and people hurting right now.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, you know, it's a career sort of cut short. But I think there was confirmation today that he had been working on a horror film with the directors of the Scream, the recent sort of Scream reboots. But apparently all the filming had been completed, so we will get to see another Angus Cloud performance on the big screen. And yeah, obviously, yeah, Euphoria is now off the table, but you know, not the time to be even thinking about how it's going to affect that. It's just yeah, sending our thoughts to the family at this time for that. So you know, one sort of story sadly is ended, but you know, today we're going to look at another story, and that is the story of Stephen Curry in Underrated, a sports documentary by Peter Nix. It charts the coming-of-age story of Stephen Curry, one of the most influential, dynamic, and unexpected players in basketball history in his time from an undersized college player to a four-time NBA champion. I like the use of the word undersized in that, considering apparently he's 6'2", but that's apparently considered undersized for the NBA. So, I mean, I'd have no chance. So, if anyone is unfamiliar with this basketball player, he is, let's just list some of his small minor accomplishments. He's a four-time NBA champion, two-time NBA Most Valuable Player MVP, an NBA Finals MVP, an NBA All-Star Game MVP, a nine-time NBA All-Star, and nine-time All-NBA selection, and he currently holds the record for the most three-pointers in NBA history. So before we dive into the film, I guess, were you familiar with the work and game of Stephen Curry?
No, I really, really wasn't. I knew the name, but truth be told, anything beyond that was completely new to me. I kind of could have told you that he was sort of playing on the West Coast, who he was playing for, whether it was the Jazz or the Lakers, etc. Couldn't really tell you. Completely ignorant about that, and I guess a bit ignorant about some of their successes. So, you know, it was something I was going into kind of, I guess, really blind. And obviously, I'm sure we'll talk about things like kind of The Last Dance, where I knew very little about that either. But there was sort of like a cultural imprint on sort of all of us 90s kids that we kind of knew about the Chicago Bulls, Jordan, etc. That sort of cultural imprint hasn't really extended, I guess, perhaps beyond sort of America in terms of Stephen Curry, but maybe that's just my own ignorance.
I mean, I'm sort of familiar with him as a player. I've sort of casually kept up with basketball for the last few years. I used to play it as a kid and was really into it in the 90s. I think it was when it first came on to, I think it was Sky and whatever. It was around about sort of, I think I really got into it in sort of the mid to late 90s. So that was sort of, you were getting towards the end of the Chicago Bulls run. It was the emergence of like Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magic and stuff like that. So that's when I sort of captured my imagination. But yes, no, we will undoubtedly talk about the incredible Netflix documentary, The Last Dance. But there's been, but basically, I think this documentary has been sort of inspired or certainly it's certainly helped films like this where you know they're clearly is looking to be that sort of breakout sort of crossover audience for, well, you know, I'm pretty sure that everyone who watched The Last Dance was not originally a basketball fan. So you know there is an audience out there. I know that since then there's been a couple of documentaries as well about the Dream Team, which was the first time that NBA players played in the Olympics back in the early 90s. And then I think it was, I can't remember what it was called, the Undream Team or whatever. It was about the group of NBA players who had to go to the Olympics in the Olympics after the first Olympics that the professionals had not actually won the gold medal. I think they ended up getting the bronze medal, which was seen as a huge failure at that point. And then it was about how do they redeem themselves. It was called the Redeem Team. So and that was on Netflix as well. So you know, there's an audience for this sort of documentary, and I guess it'd be interesting to get your opinion on it, given the fact that you're coming to, you know, could you enjoy this film as someone who has never sort of heard of Stephen Curry? Obviously, there's, you know, diehard fans who'll be interested, you know, in hearing a bit more about his story, but can it work for a rookie on the basketball court, so to speak? So this documentary essentially begins with him breaking the all-time three-point record in the NBA before sort of charting parallel timelines as it looks at his breakout seasons as a young sort of sophomore player Davis in college, and then the 2022 season for the Golden State Warriors, where they're going through a bit of a rough patch on the court, a bit of a losing streak, and can they turn it around in order to try and make the playoffs? So, I mean, yeah, as someone with not much knowledge of the player or the game, did it grab you?
No, I was kind of. I guess it's one of those ones. My expectations weren't too high for this one. It sort of was like, in a way, in a way, I'm actually kind of lying there because I was kind of looking forward to a little bit where I think I've said it when we spoke about like Uncut Gems and on our other podcast, we kind of reviewed sort of The Last Dance, that I'm not a big basketball person. It's never really appealed to me, but seeing something like Uncut Gems and getting really gripped by sort of the basketball footage there, I think I nearly had a heart attack when we went to see that one.
You're only invested if a man has bet $168,000 on a game.
And then when it came to The Last Dance, I know obviously it was getting released weekly here in the UK, and I think I was behind for the first few episodes, and then I got caught up, and I was just absolutely gripped by it, like wondering where this was going to go. I had, obviously knew about some of the Chicago Bulls' success, but sort of the later part of their kind of dynasty and how that was going to go. I mean, I was sitting there just absolutely hating. I think it was the Utah Jazz, absolutely kind of gripped by that, and I thought, wow, I've really got invested in the Celtics, and then I got really into it with sort of the Chicago Bulls. So I was like, third time's a charm, and looking forward to getting another perspective on it. And unfortunately, I guess for this one, for a lot of people, they are going to be thinking of those other, I suppose, that other documentary in terms of sort of The Last Dance and how that really elevated and raised the quality and what people maybe expect from this. Whereas I watched this and it was kind of probably the sort of thing you'd maybe get on like ESPN or Sky Sports on like a midweek. There's no sports on, and we're going to just do a little bit of a character profile of a sports player, and it just lacked really anything that kind of gripped me. I think there's some really interesting stories in there, but just the way it chooses to kind of follow, and it just didn't make sense. I think we see a lot of his like early kind of young career kind of with Davidson, and sort of how this team goes from kind of nothing to really successful and close to success. Like, that's quite interesting, but it's kind of paralleled at the same time with like a really big story that it almost treats as a bit of an afterthought. And then there's also a story at the same time about sort of him going back to kind of study. And for sort of about 100 minutes, it's kind of trying to thread these three stories, and it doesn't really do any of them justice, where perhaps focusing on one of them in particular would really have raised some tension, or perhaps with the focus on returning to school might have been something a bit more unique.
I have to agree, as someone who loves the game. It was difficult to know who this film was for, because it is, looking at, one particular player, but I felt that I came away not really learning much about the man himself. There is this plot thread going through where, he had been the first player under, I think it was Coach McKillop, at Davidson College to not have graduated with a degree during his time playing basketball. He dropped out a year early to make himself eligible for the draft, the NBA draft, and was obviously signed by the Golden State Warriors. So, he didn't have that college degree, and he's been trying for, I think it was around about 10 years to try and get it done, but it's never worked out. And this, it's like he's now sort of doing this essay, trying to work at home, trying to do a dissertation and stuff like that. And like, that's quite interesting, that he would still be compelled to go back and do this, even though he's achieved everything that you can achieve in the NBA. It's interesting that that's sort of where his focus is, and that is, like you say, that's an interesting storyline. The it's interesting to see sort of where he came from. As apparently an unlikely basketball player. I find slightly hard to stomach or swallow that particular thing, given that his dad was a Charlotte Hornets basketball player. I think at one point he still holded one of the sort of scoring records for them. It's like, Okay, I think it's kind of he probably would have made it one way or another. Yeah, he wasn't your sort of typical sort of player. I mean, they talk a lot about his physique, that he's very, very skinny. So I guess it's not really surprising that he would sort of become known for sort of 3-pointers and stuff like that. He sort of stayed out the paint, and just on the cusp of the 3-point line, and so that's where he made his name. But yeah, no, it's like the two sort of central sort of basketball storylines are, there's the interesting one where it looks at, the rise of Davidson under, not Stephen Curry's leadership, but certainly the way he develops as a player. He doesn't actually start. He has a terrible sort of first game, and it's like, well, that could have been it. That could have been over, but he was given another chance. And then sort of the building of that team. That's interesting. I was very invested in that. But like you say, there's this other storyline which essentially feels as an afterthought. And it'd be interesting that if it had. How long I'm interested in how long they'd actually been filming this documentary. Had they actually tried to do it the season before, or because it did turn out rather convenient, didn't it? That season actually did turn around to the point where, spoilers, the Golden State Warriors did indeed make the playoffs and then went on an amazing run and actually won it. So it's that lucked out is a good feel good sort of storyline towards the end. The problem for me was that was rushed through in about 5 minutes towards the end of the documentary, from reaching the playoffs to winning the championships. How a man who has achieved everything in the sport suffers an injury, the team is going through hell, they're not winning, they're looking like they're going to be down and out. I'm interested to see how they pull themselves out of that. Where's the backstage, the locker room chat where Steph Curry is becoming a leader of men, right, bringing them back to the point where that is where I wanted to see, and that's not the film we got. It's a very passive documentary, I think, and also, I mean, I guess maybe they were trying to avoid the multiple comparisons with something like The Last Dance, but the lack of sort of talking heads, particularly with Stephen Curry as well, it all added up to keeping up a wall sort of between the player and the audience, and I think that's what didn't work for me. I didn't feel like I came away with much real knowledge of who the man was. Yes, I can see his accomplishments and what he's like as a player, but as a person, yeah, I didn't really get much from it.
Yeah, he's just quite a bland figure. And I actually think the reality is most sports people are like that. They're so media trained these days that
Not everyone can be Dennis Rodman.
no, and most people. It's always like when people say about like Andy Murray, the Scottish tennis player. Oh, he's so dour. Oh, he doesn't say anything or do much. But the reality is like he's just a really focused, disciplined sports personality player. Like he's not a personality. He's not this or that, and I really wouldn't expect him to be. And the real lack of hindsight makes this sort of like difficult to invest in. As you say, like there's not going to be the honesty that we got with The Last Dance, where people have had a couple of decades to reflect on things. There's the contradictions in people's like assessments, the kind of what people are more happy to say. The reality is a lot of them are still high, playing in high level sports. They're not really going to be kind of digging people out, highlighting their petty grievances, being honest about the locker room. It makes it just a very safe documentary. And kind of what else would you expect? Stephen Curry is not going to be slating people or putting himself out there. He's someone that's clearly very guarded, very protected about himself and so on. And I'd rather maybe see this documentary in a few years time, or maybe it's going to be a TV show or something like that. Just the timing of it just doesn't work and doesn't allow that retrospection that I think made The Last Dance all the more better. And perhaps I think it's safe to say the show was incredibly iconic.
It's lacking that sort of bite, isn't it? It's that it needs it seems a shame to continually compare it to The Last Dance, but yeah, it needs sort of like an antagonist figure, I guess, in it, some sort of rivalry, or something that you can almost be on Curry's side, to rile up against, because I know that like for several of the championships, I think they went on a run of, I think it was 7 straight um, NBA finals, and I think for a lot of them they were up against the Cleveland Cavaliers, which I believe probably at that time was probably a sort of LeBron James era. So, some sort of thing, where you obviously maybe where you're being challenged, he's the GOAT, the great stuff of this particular generation, but then someone will say, well, no, he isn't, LeBron is, and stuff like that. Something where you've got that sort of rivalry and comparison where you can then sort of, get a bit sort of needle them just a little bit to get like a juicy quote here or there or something. Yeah, it was a little too safe, and therefore ultimately not really that compelling a movie, sadly.
Yeah, and I think an interesting kind of character was the mum. Like, as you mentioned, sort of the dad, again, there's that almost element that it kind of glosses over something that could almost come across as, oh, he's this Nepo baby, and sort of like he perhaps, like, what was that dynamic like with his dad, who had that sort of success as well. But, like, the mum was such an interesting kind of character to kind of watch, and sort of her influence over her son. And it reminded me again of, really sorry to keep bringing up Michael Jordan, but something like Air, for example, where we saw the how much of a role the mum played in sort of that early career, and you could sort of see a parallel there. I'd have maybe been more interested in sort of that kind of like the people behind Stephen Curry, for example, and I think that would have been such an interesting one to explore.
To make the man, it is the people that surround him, and I think there could have been more. I think from like the likes of like his, I think more even from like the teammates at Davidson and stuff like that. They're briefly featured, but more of that sort of thing. And Coach McKillop, who seemed like quite a character, I think he would have been quite a stern, tough coach. Fair but a tough one. If you weren't delivering on the court, I think he was quite clear in sort of telling them what he expected of them and stuff like that. So yeah, just a bit more about the man and less of the player and more about the man, I think, is what was needed from this.
Yeah, that coach was such an interesting kind of character, and you could sort of see the parallels again. I'm really sorry to say with like The Last Dance, of this real like father figure type individual who brings together this ragtag group of people that where it shouldn't really work, but it does. And it was just interesting to see that as well. And I'd be interested in sort of seeing something like that about sort of some of these coaches.
That movie, I would like to see that movie, the Davidson movie, where there's like one of the sort of journalists is talking about the fact that they hadn't been to the NCAA championships for, I think it was like 30-40 years. They hadn't won a game, and then they go on this run, and what it means for the town and all that sort of thing. That is a movie I would like to see. It's the classic sort of underdog sort of thing. It's very sort of Hollywood and stuff like that. So that is kind of something this unfortunately wasn't. You can see it's a frustrating watch because you can see better movies in there, or I wish they'd done a bit more of that. And yeah, ultimately, what we get is not what we deserve, and probably not what the man deserves either.
I was also thinking as well. I mean, obviously this was an Apple TV Plus release, and it was kind of weird to almost just reflect back on some of their releases so far. I mean, it's a weird mix, but obviously I started to kind of notice the trend of documentaries seems to be the kind of where A24, like, it's still unclear what this whole partnership necessarily is and how it all works. But when you think about, like, over the past few years, we've got The Elephant Queen, which is probably the least interesting A24 connected film that we've ever reviewed. Then you get something like The Tragedy of Macbeth, like prestige picture. Then you get On the Rocks, Sofia Coppola, long history with A24 from the beginning, obviously a new film to come. Sharper, kind of a bit of forgettable, truth be told. Boys State, which I would probably argue is one of the best A24 Apple TV films, where it was the documentary that explored sort of like kind of politics and sort of young people, and sort of like doing kind of model UN stuff. Like, then there was The Sky is Everywhere, which I didn't particularly think was great. Then we had Causeway again, sort of a bit of prestige, and then sort of looking ahead to what's to come. And we spoke about it quite recently about like, oh, if there's going to be a sequel to this or that, we're going to get a 2-part Steve Martin documentary, which is going straight to Apple TV Plus as well. So it's kind of interesting how sort of A24 have kind of removed documentaries in the sort of cinema for kind of streaming services, like we saw Deepest Breath on Netflix, and now another one kind of going straight to Apple TV Plus.
Yeah, I mean, I think, looking at what they've released with Apple so far, maybe Apple, A24, A average would be my assessment of the releases so far overall. But I think part of it is the sort of the streaming model, the success that Netflix have had with their documentaries, Last Dance, but even like Tiger King and all that sort of stuff like that. It's like that's where people seem to find and enjoy, and it creates those sort of water cooler moments, and I think that's where I think the documentaries, obviously cinema has had a tough time with the pandemic and all that, and it's just coming back, and you can see success. It's the movies that people are going to see are the sort of escapist sort of ones. They don't want to see reminders of real life on the big screen. So I think it is something which works on the smaller screens. So I guess Apple TV may eventually become the documentary division of A24, perhaps.
Yeah, it feels like that's where it's going anyway. Yeah, I mean, I recently found myself rewatching The Last Dance TV show. I've still got to kind of finish it. I was watching with my partner and forgot how great it was. I mean, I say I forgot how great it was. I forgot so many of the moments that made it like truly great. I knew it was great. And Uncut Gems I never tire of watching, but this one is just continuing, I guess, that trend we spoke about where it's been a bit of a lackluster 2023 for A24 so far, and I think this is another one where it just kind of goes down on the disappointment list, but it just means we're now one episode closer to being able to review Past Lives at long last together, so win some, lose some.
Exactly. So yes, underrated, not even overrated. We've just rated it, and we've rated it, I think, was it 1.5, sort of 2 stars, if best. For die-hard fans of Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors only, probably, I would say it just doesn't have that crossover breakout appeal that would engage audiences who are looking for the next Last Dance. This is not it. It's not even a first dance.
It was quite funny watching it on Letterboxd, the amount of people that seem to just wade in, having a look at the reviews of just like rivals, I guess, of different teams, just kind of going like, he's a fraud. He doesn't hold a he doesn't hold a candle to Kobe, or all these kind of big name personalities. It was quite funny to watch sports trolling move from Twitter to Letterboxd reviews. So strange bedfellows there.
Nowhere is safe. No format is safe from the trolls. So yes, that's another film down. And like you say, in a couple of weeks we're going to be reviewing Past Lives once Lee's finally got it at the Edinburgh International Film Festival. But next up from us is one which kind of snuck into the A24 schedule for us. I think it had been released earlier this year in the UK under Mubi, but it seems that A24 have picked up the distribution rights for Medusa Deluxe. So that will be our next review. So as always, we're on unlike some basketball players, we're on a bit of a hot streak right now. I think it's going to be about 5 or 6 weeks in a row. We're going to have something for you to listen to. So stay tuned, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the A24 Project.